Imagine waking up in the middle of the night to see this staring back at you. A man in a disfigured mask with a wig on top. He's wearing a long black trench coat that has inch-long nails protruding out of the collar and the cuffs. If you didn't see those nails, you certainly felt them as you were attempting to push him away from you and they sank into your skin. Well, unfortunately, this was the reality for 13 women and children. Today, we will be unboxing history on a true monster, but before we begin, if you enjoy these videos on horrific history and strange, unusual, please do me a favor and subscribe. I'm going to keep releasing these videos at least once a week on an ongoing basis. But without further ado, let's get to it. From 1957 to 1971, the monster nicknamed the Beast of Jersey terrorized the island for 14 years, and he was only caught by chance. In November of 1957, a female nurse is waiting at the bus stop after working a late shift, when suddenly, up from behind, a man slips a rope around her neck and pulls it tight. He then proceeds to drag her to a vacant lot in the distance. There, the monster brutally beats and sexually assaults the woman before fleeing. The woman, who was badly injured and bleeding, survives and manages to report the incident to the police, although the attacker left behind no evidence. His face was hidden behind a scarf, and the only other thing the woman could recall is an awful musty scent that came from the man. This was the first out of 13 attacks. Over the next 2 years, the monster would continue to target women who were waiting for buses. In March of 1958, he assaulted another young woman in the same exact way. He then repeated this in July, and then again in October of 1959. At this point, the monster has already assaulted 4 victims, so as he begins to feel unstoppable, he ups the ante by breaking into victims' homes. It was Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1960, when a 12-year-old boy is in bed sleeping. He wakes up to a man standing over him with a flashlight, and like the other victims, Edward tied a rope around the boy's neck, dragged him out of his own home, brought him to a secluded field, and sexually assaulted him. After that, he walked the boy back to his home and then fled. And in March, a woman is walking towards the bus stop when a man approaches her in his car. He offers her a ride, and she unfortunately says yes. Only moments after, she would also have a rope tied tightly around her neck before being brought to another empty field to be assaulted. Later that month, a 43-year-old woman and her daughter are at home sleeping. It's around 12 in the morning when suddenly the phone rings. The mother wakes up, and as she picks up the phone, nobody responds, but she just hears a clicking sound. She thinks nothing of it, she puts the phone down, she assumes it must have been a prank call, and she gets back into bed. But then shortly after, she begins to hear sounds coming from downstairs. Scared, she opens the bedroom door and begins to creep down the stairs slowly. But first, she makes sure to turn on the light in the hall. As she walks down the stairs, she gets to the bottom step and then suddenly the lights just cut off. Frantically, she lunges to grab her house phone just to realize that the line had already been cut. In the darkness, the man would attack the woman, who manages to break free. She runs out the front door and she goes to get help. Now, mind you, this cottage is in a remote area, so the neighbors are not close by. The worst part about this is as the mother is running away from her home, she's leaving behind her 14-year-old daughter who is in her bedroom terrified. By the time the mother returns home, the man had already tied up and assaulted and brutally beat the 14-year-old girl. After this moment, the monster would only begin to target children. In April, this is when he officially begins to wear the infamous monster mask. That same month, a 14-year-old girl is in bed sleeping when she wakes up to a strange sound coming from the corner of her room. When she wakes up, she sees this looking down at her. It's in this moment that she is so terrified, she lets out the loudest and most shattering scream. And for the first time, the man flees and the girl is spared. But over the following months, he just continued to do this. From July 1960 to April 1961, the man continues to break into the rooms of children, kidnapping them from their own room, bringing them to vacant fields, assaulting them. Victims ranged in age from 8 to 12. At this point, the locals of Jersey were terrorized for 3 years, and the police still had no suspects. With a growing number of victim testimony, police began to start building a profile on this monster. They knew they were looking for a lean man who was about 5'6". They also knew that he smelled musty, and that he spoke in an odd Irish accent, but it sounded almost as if he was impersonating it. Police also knew the attacker's sweet spot was between 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. This was always the time that he would attack his victims. At wit's end, police decide to start questioning every resident on the island who has a criminal background. During the questioning, they would also request the person to submit their fingerprints so they could rule them out as a suspect. In tandem, they also start to request the fingerprints of all the men on the island itself. Out of thousands of people who are interviewed and fingerprinted, there are only 13 who refuse to give up their prints to the police. So you would assume that the police would really dig deep into this list of 13 possible suspects, because why else would they not want to share their fingerprints so this way their name could be cleared? Police do not do this. They focus their attention on a very quiet and older man who keeps to himself. His name is Alphonse, and he is considered to be the prime suspect. Why, you ask? Because he had a raincoat, and that also he was known to walk around the island of Jersey by himself. Alphonse was questioned by police and his home was searched multiple times, but there was no evidence that was ever recovered. In fact, they really had no evidence to even link him to, aside from him just keeping to himself, him walking around the island on his own, and him owning a raincoat. But it did not have spikes coming from the collar, and it didn't smell musty. With the police being so rash to just convict someone, they planted the seed in the locals' mind that Alphonse was the monster, so much so that the locals burned down his house. Now homeless, he was concerned for his own safety too, because locals were so infuriated. Alphonse was just another victim himself, because the whole town turned against him. Even the police wanted to arrest him, but he wasn't guilty. The joke was on the police and all of the other locals when, even after Alfonso fled for his own well-being and safety, the attacks continued to happen. In April of 1963, a 9-year-old boy was again taken from his home and assaulted in a field. Then, in November, an 11-year-old boy was also attacked. In July of 1964, a 10-year-old girl is attacked. And then in August, a boy who is the same age is also attacked. They're all taken from their home in the middle of the night and sexually assaulted in the same way. And suddenly, for 2 years, the crimes and attacks stop. Police are starting to feel slightly relieved, and so are residents. But in 1966, police receive a letter from the monster. It's essentially taunting them since they have not been able to catch him. The letter closes with the line, "I like to play with you people. You will hear from me before September, and I will give you all the clues, just to see if you can catch me. Yours very sincerely, wait and see." Shortly after, he followed this letter with another horrific assault of a 15-year-old girl. The only difference with this attack was the girl's body was covered in long, perfectly parallel scratches. And 4 years later, in August 1970, a 14-year-old boy is attacked in the same manner, again in his room while he was sleeping. He also had the same parallel scratches on his torso. It's not until July 10th, 1971 that 2 police officers are parked and sitting on patrol when suddenly they see somebody blow past a red light and speeding. Police quickly start to chase the car down, but instead of pulling over, the car speeds up and then soon begins to drive frantically. Driving on the wrong side of the road, driving on the sidewalks, ultimately before it crashes into a large hedge. The man who's driving the car then gets out of it and begins to run on foot to try to get away from the police. But officers thankfully were able to tackle him to the ground and arrest him. In the heat of the moment, the police aren't really even thinking who this man could be. But as he's in the back of their squad car and they're driving back to the station, they remember smelling that distinct musty smell that so many other victims before had mentioned. When the man gets out of the car, they realize he's wearing a long dark trench coat with 1-inch nails protruding from the collar and cuffs. It's the coat that the victims before had reported. The police quickly realize that these nails on the collar and cuffs are what created those parallel scratches on the latest 2 victims. When they search the coat pockets, they find the infamous black flashlight. It's the one that he had used when breaking into all of the victims' houses. And also on the head of the flashlight itself, they noticed he had black tape, so this way only a very small amount of light would shine through. So this way, it wouldn't be noticeable when the flashlight was on. It was just enough light for him to see and navigate around somebody's house. When they search the car, they find the wig and the horrific mask that the attacker would wear during all of these assaults. When police questioned the man about his outfit and why he attempted to speed away instead of just pulling over, he tells them that he was on his way to an orgy and he didn't want to be recognized. As for the nails on his collar and wrist, he says the only reason he had those was in case he ran into somebody on the street who knew martial arts. So this way it would protect him. When police ask about the wig and the mask, he refuses to make any comment. Judging from the impressions that were still on his face, he was wearing that mask that same night. Possibly he had pulled it off right before the police pulled him over. When police accuse him of being the infamous monster of Jersey, he just replies, "Prove it." Turns out the police had arrested 46-year-old Edward Paisnel, a married local who had a wife, a daughter, and 2 stepchildren. He met his wife Joan, ironically, at a foster home for children that her own mother founded, and he worked there as a handyman. And there, the children loved him, since in December he would dress up as Santa Claus, he would give the kids treats, and the kids would even refer to him as Uncle Ted. Before this, the only other time he was arrested was during World War II when he stole food to feed to starving families. So on paper, this guy looked like an upstanding and great guy. Those who knew him assumed that he was in a very happy relationship. He was also an active member of the community. Although his wife Joan would admit that her husband had a very low sex drive, but meanwhile, he had a mistress on the side. Over the years, their marriage started to deteriorate, and eventually, Edward was essentially living in a separate section of the house on the other side. So he wasn't really even in the same home as his wife. The two were connected, but his living quarters were totally separate. When they searched his bedroom, they discovered a locked hidden room inside his bedroom. And once they pried that door open, they were first hit with that awful musty smell. They searched, they found a collection of homemade wigs and clothing that were covered in various bodily fluids. On the walls were photographs of all the victims' homes. Investigators believe that he had been planning these crimes for years, and that's why he had these pictures, because he had planned how he was going to break into the homes. He had already selected the victims that he wanted to choose. Also inside the room was an altar with books on black magic and other ritualistic items. In the end, it took the jury less than 40 minutes to deliberate and see that Edward was guilty of 13 counts of assault and sodomy. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. He was also denied the opportunity to appeal the decision. But then in 1991, Edward was released 10 years early from his sentence for being a model prisoner. Edward even had the audacity to return to the same island of Jersey to live. Locals clearly were infuriated and shunned their backs on him. He realized he couldn't just live there, so he moves away, but he would die 3 years later of a heart attack in 1994. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and if you have any recommendations of other horrific history events that you would like me to cover, please let me know, and I will make videos on them and comment below. Alright, thank you, until next time.